If God created everything, then who created God? This is the question that has haunted prophets, philosophers, and even scientists for centuries. Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, entered deep states of trance where he explored mysteries far beyond human understanding, and even in those states, he was confronted with this ultimate question: what was before creation, and what is the true nature of God? Before I take you into this journey, let me ask you, what do you personally believe came before creation? Write it in the comments, because this is one of those moments where every perspective matters, and your insight could spark a discussion that changes how others see reality. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because we bring these hidden truths to light in ways that can awaken something deep inside you. Now imagine this: a time before time itself. No stars, no planets, no galaxies, not even the concept of space or matter. Just silence. But Cayce said this silence was not empty. It was filled with the presence, the eternal consciousness that has always been. In his words, God was not born, God did not begin, God simply is. To our human minds used to beginnings and endings, this idea sounds almost impossible. Yet Cayce revealed that what we call God is the source, the infinite field from which all existence flows. In other words, asking about the origin of God is like asking what came before eternity. The very question reveals how small our perception is compared to the vastness of the infinite. And yet, Cayce gave us glimpses that can ignite something within us, glimpses that make us realize that this presence has always been guiding not only the birth of the universe, but also the path of each individual soul. Think of the Great Depression in the United States, the time when Cayce was most active. Families came to him broken, with no food, no hope, no future. In his trance sessions, Cayce did not simply give predictions about health or daily life. He spoke of the eternal. He said that the same God who existed before creation existed in those moments of despair, waiting for people to remember their true connection to the source. That is why when people asked, who created God, or where did God come from, Cayce would always direct them to a higher perspective. God had no origin. God is the very ground of existence, the eternal awareness from which time, space, and matter appeared. And this truth was not just philosophical, it was deeply practical. Because if God had no beginning, then our souls, created in God's image, also carried something eternal that no crisis, no hunger, no tragedy could ever destroy. Cayce described creation itself not as a random event, but as the unfolding of divine will. Before the stars were born, before matter condensed, Cayce said there was the word, the vibration, the thought, the first movement of the infinite consciousness. It was this vibration that gave rise to light, and from light the building blocks of the universe. And even here we see that the idea of an origin of God makes no sense. For Cayce, God is the thought before thought, the presence before movement, the cause that does not need a cause. If you're listening now, pause for a moment. Try to imagine silence so absolute that nothing exists, and then imagine realizing that even in that silence there is awareness. That awareness is God. That awareness is eternal, and you are part of it. For those who struggle with faith, this explanation is not about blind belief. It's about rethinking what existence really is. Science tells us that the universe had a beginning, the Big Bang. But Cayce, long before cosmologists, said that the universe was born from consciousness. Not chaos, not accident, consciousness. And this consciousness was God, eternal, self-existent. In one of his sessions, Cayce said plainly, God is, and beside him there is none other. No beginning, no end, just being. And within that being, the seeds of creation. Isn't it incredible? Because this means that when we ask, who created God, we are missing the point. The right question is, how do I awaken to the God that already lives within me? And this is where Cayce always brought it back to practical life. Before we move deeper, let me remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Every week we explore the most hidden, transformative teachings of Edgar Cayce, teachings that can open your mind and bring peace to your heart. By subscribing, you make sure you never miss the next revelation, and you help us spread these truths to more souls who are searching for answers. Because the truth is, this is not only about theology, it is about identity. If God has no origin and is eternal, then what does it mean that we are made in the image of God? Cayce explained that each soul is a spark of that same eternal consciousness. That means your soul did not start when your body was born, and it will not end when your body dies. Your essence, just like God's essence, is beyond time. This truth is at once humbling and empowering. Humbling because it shows us how small we are in the face of eternity. Empowering because it shows us that no matter what we face, we carry the same eternal flame within. Cayce often said that the soul's journey began long before it took on human form. He described the creation of souls as sparks emerging from the eternal flame. Imagine billions of sparks igniting from a limitless fire, each carrying the essence of the source, yet given freedom to explore, to choose, to experience. That was humanity's beginning, not in terms of flesh and blood, but in terms of consciousness. And here is the paradox that Cayce wanted us to understand. While souls had a beginning, God did not. The fire was always there. The source did not appear in time. The source is beyond time. This is why when people desperately wanted to know where God came from, Cayce shifted the focus. He explained that the real mystery is not God's origin, but our forgetfulness, forgetting that we are part of something eternal and that separation is an illusion. Now pause and think. How much of your daily suffering comes from believing you are small, temporary, fragile? Cayce urged people to look deeper, to recognize that every breath you take is sustained by the same infinite consciousness that sustains galaxies. He said that if we truly remembered our connection with God, we would not fear death, we would not collapse under suffering, and we would not doubt our worth. This was the heart of his teachings. The eternal God calls us to awaken to the eternal within ourselves. So when you hear the phrase, the origin of God, remember, it's not about God's beginning, but about our awakening. During one reading, Cayce described creation in a way that almost sounds poetic. He said it began with desire, the desire of the Creator to express, to give, to share love. Out of this desire, energy moved. Out of energy came light. Out of light came form. And within that form, the soul. What does this mean for us? It means that at the deepest level, your existence is not an accident, but an expression of love. And love itself is eternal, because it is the very essence of God. Think about this. Before any universe existed, love already was. Before any sun rose or planet spun, love was the force that gave birth to everything. Doesn't that change the way you see yourself? You are not here by chance. You are here because eternal love desired your existence. Cayce also emphasized that the human mind struggles with concepts like infinity. We think in terms of birth and death, start and finish, but God is not a timeline. God is presence. He explained that when Jesus spoke of the I Am, he was revealing the same truth, God as eternal being. Not I was, not I will be, but I am. Always present, always now. When you close your eyes and become aware of awareness itself, you touch a small glimpse of that eternal I Am, and in those moments you realize there is no need to search for God's origin, because the presence has never been absent. It is here, now, in this very moment as you listen to these words. For those who came to Cayce seeking physical healing, the message was often the same. True healing begins when you remember who you really are. He would guide people not only to remedies and treatments, but also to prayer, meditation, and attunement with the source. Why? Because he knew that disease and despair often grew out of forgetting our divine connection. If God is eternal, and if our souls are part of that eternal essence, then reconnecting with God's presence within us restores balance. Cayce once said, "The Spirit of God is ever present. It is we who forget." That is the heart of it. We forget. And when we forget, we suffer. But when we remember, even the darkest night becomes filled with light. This brings us to a powerful point. If God has no beginning and no end, then every challenge you face is temporary against the backdrop of eternity. Imagine holding a grain of sand and worrying that it represents your whole life, when in truth the vast ocean stretches endlessly before you. That is how Cayce wanted us to see our struggles. They are real, they are painful, but they are not ultimate. The ultimate reality is eternal God, eternal consciousness, eternal love, and you are never separate from that. In fact, every heartbeat is proof that the eternal is flowing through you. When people asked Cayce directly, "Where was God before creation?" his answers pointed to something beyond words. He said God was, God is, God will be. But more than that, he invited seekers to feel this truth, not just think about it. Because feeling the presence of God transforms despair into hope, loneliness into connection, and fear into peace. This is why these teachings are not abstract, they are deeply personal. If God is eternal, then God is with you now in your room, in your mind, in your very breath. And if that is true, then you are never truly alone. One of the most moving aspects of Cayce's work was how he brought this eternal truth into the lives of ordinary people. Picture a mother arriving at his home in Virginia Beach during the darkest years of the Great Depression. Her children are hungry, her husband has lost his job, and she feels abandoned by God. She asks Cayce in despair, "If God is real, if God is eternal, then why do we suffer like this?" In trance, Cayce would respond with words that cut deeper than any philosophy. Suffering does not mean absence of God. In fact, he explained that God's eternal presence is the very reason we have the strength to endure. He would remind her that the soul is eternal, that this life is but one chapter, and that within every hardship there lies an invitation to remember the source. Those who left his readings often felt not just guided medically or financially, but profoundly comforted. They left knowing they were not forgotten, because the eternal cannot forget. This teaching is not meant to dismiss pain, but to transform the way we perceive it. Cayce insisted that the eternal perspective was the only way to find peace amid chaos. Imagine how powerful it is to realize that the God who existed before the birth of the stars is the same God walking with you through your darkest nights. It means that every tear is seen, every prayer is heard, every soul is known. This is not theory, it is intimacy with the infinite. And this intimacy was what Cayce wanted people to rediscover. The eternal God does not stay distant. The eternal God flows through creation, through you, through every beating heart. But here is where it becomes even more transformative. If God has no beginning, then God also has no end. And if we are sparks of that eternal flame, then neither do we. Cayce explained that death is not the end of consciousness, it is merely a transition. Just as day turns to night and night turns to dawn, the soul moves from one state of being to another. This realization lifted the fear of death from countless people. He told them, "The soul existed before birth and will continue after death, because it shares in the eternal." Imagine the hope that must have stirred in those who felt life had abandoned them. Suddenly they realized that their story did not end at the grave. Their story was woven into eternity. Cayce also tied this truth to responsibility. If God is eternal, and we share in that essence, then our choices matter on an eternal scale. The way we love, forgive, or harm others does not vanish with time. It shapes the journey of the soul. That is why he stressed spiritual growth, meditation, and prayer, not as rituals, but as ways to realign with the eternal presence. He encouraged people to live with compassion, reminding them that every act echoes in eternity. When you see life this way, even the smallest choices gain incredible weight. It makes you pause before speaking in anger, before acting in selfishness, because you realize you are handling eternal substance, the soul of another, the image of God. Now let's bring it back to you. If you have ever wondered, where did God come from? Understand this. Cayce revealed that God did not come from anywhere. God is. God always was. God always will be. The question itself dissolves when you stand before infinity. And yet the fact that you asked means something profound. It means your soul is searching for connection, searching for its source. And that source is already here. Close your eyes and feel your breath. That breath is sustained by the same eternal consciousness that moves galaxies across the heavens. Doesn't that shift the way you see yourself? You are not small. You are eternal in origin, eternal in destiny. Before we move forward, let me pause to say this. If these words are opening something in your heart, if they are stirring questions or giving you peace, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now. We are building a community of seekers, people who are ready to go deeper, ready to remember what their souls already know. When you subscribe, you are not just following a channel. You are joining a circle of souls, walking together toward the eternal truth that Cayce devoted his life to share. Don't walk this journey alone. Subscribe and stay connected. Because the deeper you go into Cayce's teachings, the more you realize that the origin of God is not a riddle to be solved, but an invitation to awaken. God's eternity is not something out there. It is something you can touch within. Cayce said that Christ consciousness, the awareness of oneness with God, was the key. When you live with this awareness, life changes. Fear loses its grip. Anger dissolves faster. Gratitude rises naturally. You begin to see others not as strangers, but as fellow sparks of the same eternal flame. This is what Cayce meant when he urged people to live as if the kingdom of God is within. Not later, not elsewhere. Here, now, within you. Cayce believed that the greatest tragedy of human life was not sin or even death, it was forgetting. Forgetting that we are eternal, forgetting that we are connected to the infinite, forgetting that every soul comes from the same source. This forgetfulness is what breeds fear, hatred, and despair. He compared humanity to children who wander away from home, lost in the dark, afraid, when in truth the light of the Father is still shining, waiting for them to remember their way back. And this is why he insisted that meditation and prayer were not just religious habits but lifelines. When you pray, when you meditate, you are not begging a distant God for attention. You are tuning back into the eternal frequency that has never left you. You are realigning with what has always been. This is why Cayce often said, "Spirit is life, mind is the builder, physical is the result." At first this sounds abstract, but it is deeply practical. He meant that spirit, the eternal presence of God, is the foundation. The mind, your thoughts and beliefs, are the tools that shape your experience, and the body, your physical reality, is the result of what has been built. So when we forget spirit, our minds drift into fear, and our lives reflect that fear. But when we remember spirit, when we center ourselves in the eternal, our minds shift toward love and peace, and life reflects that. This principle changed the lives of thousands who came to him. It wasn't magic. It wasn't superstition. It was the eternal law of alignment. What you align with, you manifest. Let's bring this closer to home. Think of the times you felt completely alone. Times when it seemed like no one understood, no one cared, no one was listening. Cayce would say in those moments, the eternal was still there. Just as radio waves fill the air even when you can't hear them, God's presence surrounds you even when you can't feel it. All it takes is tuning in. That's why he encouraged people to create daily moments of stillness, even just 5 minutes of silence to reconnect. Because when you turn inward, you discover that the eternal is not far away. It is right here. It has been carrying you all along. One of Cayce's most famous statements was that mind is the builder, but what he meant at the deepest level was that the mind is powerful because it is part of the eternal. Our thoughts are not just random sparks, they are connected to the source itself. This is why he taught that prayer works, not because it convinces God to act, but because it realigns us with what God already is. Imagine the peace that comes when you stop thinking of God as a being who might say yes or no, and start realizing that God is the eternal presence of life and love itself. The moment you align with that presence, healing begins, transformation begins, peace begins. So let's return to the haunting question. If God created everything, then who created God? After everything we've explored, can you see how the question dissolves? God was not created. God is. And that is why your soul can rest. Because you are not floating in a meaningless universe, you are embraced by eternity itself. Cayce's answer was not meant to satisfy the mind alone. It was meant to awaken the heart. To realize that if God has no beginning, then love has no beginning. And if love has no end, then neither does your soul. Isn't that the most comforting truth you could ever hold on to? But this truth also calls for courage, because if you share in the eternal, then your choices matter eternally. Cayce urged people to live with responsibility, not in fear, but in love. To forgive, because forgiveness echoes into eternity. To love, because love is the essence of eternity. To serve, because serving another soul is honoring God Himself. And if you think your small acts don't matter, remember this. Eternity is built out of moments. Every smile, every kind word, every prayer shapes the eternal fabric. That is how powerful you are, because you carry the eternal within you. Cayce often illustrated this truth by reminding people of Christ's words, "The kingdom of God is within you." He would explain that this was not poetry, not metaphor, but reality. If God is eternal and we are created in that image, then the eternal kingdom is alive inside of us. The tragedy is that most people never look within. They search the stars, they build philosophies, they chase wealth and power, but they ignore the silent presence in their own hearts. Cayce said that awakening is not about finding God somewhere out there. It is about remembering that God has always been here, within, closer than your own breath. And when you realize this, fear begins to lose its grip. Because how can you fear the end when you are part of what has no end? Take a moment to imagine what your life would look like if you lived every day with that awareness. The stress of money, the anxiety of the future, the pain of the past, suddenly they shrink compared to the vastness of eternity. You would see setbacks not as the end of your story, but as chapters in a much larger book. You would see other people not as enemies or strangers, but as fellow sparks of the same eternal flame. That is the power of this teaching. It changes not only how you see God, but how you see yourself and the world around you. And this shift, Cayce believed, was the foundation of true peace. When people came to him asking for predictions about war, about the economy, about personal futures, he often redirected them. He would say, "What matters most is not what will happen, but how you align yourself with the eternal now. Because history rises and falls, nations are born and die, but God remains. And if you are aligned with that eternal presence, then no matter what comes, you are safe in the deepest sense." This was not a promise of an easy life, it was a promise of meaning. Even in suffering, even in loss, you are part of something that cannot be destroyed. That realization carried people through the Great Depression, through illness, through heartbreak. And it can carry you through whatever storm you face today. But let's not miss the intimacy here. Cayce did not describe God as a cold force or an abstract energy. He described God as a presence of love, a consciousness that knows and cares. That means when you pray, you are not sending words into the void. You are opening yourself to the love that has always been. It means that when you sit in silence and feel that stillness, you are touching eternity. And in that moment, the question, "Who created God?" becomes irrelevant. Because you realize you are not dealing with a being who had a start, but with the very ground of existence. You are resting in what has no beginning and no end. Now I want to ask you, if you really believe that God has no beginning and no end, how would it change the way you live tomorrow? Would you treat people differently? Would you let go of grudges faster? Would you stop worrying about things that don't matter in the light of eternity? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you, and your answer might inspire someone else who is listening right now. Cayce often reminded seekers that eternity is not something we wait for after death. It is happening now. Every choice we make, every thought we hold, every action we take is already part of the eternal flow. That is why he insisted that the way we live daily life matters more than any doctrine we claim to believe. Eternity is not delayed until the grave. Eternity is woven into this very breath you are taking. Think about that. The same eternal presence that existed before galaxies spun into motion is alive in you at this very instant. That is the power Cayce wanted us to realize, because once you feel it, life can never be the same. And here lies the heart of his message. When people asked about the origin of God, what they were really yearning for was reassurance. Reassurance that life has meaning, that suffering is not random, that love is not temporary. Cayce's answer, though simple, carried a depth that touches the soul. God has no origin. God is. And because God is eternal, you are never outside of his presence. Even in moments of deepest despair, even when you feel abandoned, the eternal is still carrying you. That is why so many people who left his readings felt peace. They realized they were not adrift in a meaningless universe, but embraced by an eternal source of love. Think of how liberating this can be. If God is eternal, then hope is eternal. If God is eternal, then love is eternal. If God is eternal, then you, as part of that essence, are also eternal. Death cannot erase you. Failure cannot define you. Fear cannot destroy you. Because your true self is not built on time. It is built on eternity. This realization changes everything. It gives you courage to face challenges, strength to forgive, and patience to endure. It is not wishful thinking. It is the deepest truth of existence. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a choice. To live as if life is random, temporary, fragile, or to live as if every moment is eternal, sacred, filled with meaning. Cayce urged us to choose the latter, to live with compassion, to love with courage, to forgive freely, to remember daily that the eternal God lives within. And if you forget, return again and again to silence, to prayer, to that still small voice inside you, because that is where eternity whispers, reminding you who you are and where you come from. If this message has touched your heart, if it has opened a new perspective, I invite you now, subscribe to this channel and walk with us. We are building a community of souls who seek more than surface answers, who want to dive into the eternal truths Cayce revealed. When you subscribe, you are saying yes to a journey that is bigger than time, bigger than fear, bigger than doubt. You are saying yes to remembering what your soul has always known, that God is eternal and so are you. So I leave you with this thought. The next time someone asks, "Who created God?" you will know the answer. Not a debate, not an argument, but a truth that silences the question itself. God was not created, God is. And in that eternal I am, you are forever home. Why do corrupt people seem to prosper, while good-hearted souls struggle? This question plagued thousands who sought Edgar Cayce's guidance throughout his life, and what he revealed in his readings about this ancient paradox wasn't just about karma or cosmic laws. It was about Christ, about God's love, and about a truth that would bring the suffering closer to the heart of the divine than those who seem to prosper in their wickedness. Before we explore Cayce's Christ-centered answer to this timeless question, if this topic speaks to your soul, hit that like button and comment below. Have you ever questioned God when seeing evil prosper while good people suffer? I'll mark every comment with a heart because your faith journey matters, and subscribe because what Cayce discovered about God's justice and Christ's love will transform how you see every trial in your life. Edgar Cayce wasn't just a mystic or a psychic. He was a devoted Christian, a lifelong Sunday school teacher who read the Bible cover to cover every single year of his adult life. When people came to him in Virginia Beach asking why the wicked prosper while the righteous suffer, he didn't give them abstract philosophy. He pointed them to Christ. He opened the scripture. He reminded them of what Jesus himself said about this very question. During his decades of readings, Cayce addressed this question repeatedly, and his answer always circled back to the same profound truth. We're looking at success and suffering through human eyes, but God sees with eternal vision. And more importantly, God isn't distant or indifferent to our pain. He's intimately involved, drawing us closer to him through every trial, using even injustice to accomplish his divine purposes in our souls. Cayce often referenced the words of Christ in the Gospels. Jesus said the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. He warned that in this world we would have tribulation. He told his followers that they would face persecution, that the world would hate them as it hated him. Jesus himself, the most righteous man who ever lived, suffered the most unjust death in history. The Son of God, innocent and pure, was crucified while Barabbas, a murderer, went free. This wasn't cosmic mistake or divine failure. It was the very mechanism of redemption. Christ's suffering revealed something profound about God's kingdom. It operates on completely different principles than worldly kingdoms. In God's economy, suffering isn't punishment for the righteous, it's refinement. It's not abandonment, it's invitation to deeper intimacy with the Father. Cayce emphasized in his readings that every soul is on a journey back to God. We separated ourselves from divine consciousness through our own choices, and now we're finding our way home. This journey isn't about earning God's love, we already have that unconditionally. It's about becoming capable of receiving and reflecting that love fully. It's about transforming our consciousness until we can dwell in God's presence, until Christ can fully express through us. Here's where Cayce's teaching becomes revolutionary for anyone struggling with the apparent injustice of life. The person prospering through corruption isn't actually succeeding. They're moving further from God with every dishonest choice. They're hardening their hearts, dimming their spiritual vision, building walls between themselves and divine love. Their material wealth is like beautiful wrapping paper on an empty box. They have the appearance of blessing without the substance of God's presence. The scripture that Cayce referenced most often on this topic was from Psalms. "I have been young and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread." Not because righteous people always have material abundance, but because God never abandons those who seek Him. The righteous have something infinitely more valuable than money or power. They have the presence of the living God walking with them through every valley. Cayce explained that when good people suffer, God is actually drawing them into deeper relationship with Him. In comfort and ease, we can forget our dependence on the divine. We can become self-sufficient, proud, distant from the source of all life. But in suffering, in struggle, in facing what we cannot overcome alone, we're driven to our knees. We cry out to God. We open ourselves to His grace in ways prosperity never produces. This is why the Apostle Paul, whom Cayce often quoted, could say, "I glory in my tribulations." Paul understood that suffering was producing something precious in him: perseverance, character, hope, and deeper intimacy with Christ. Paul had experienced both prosperity and poverty, honor and humiliation. He discovered that knowing Christ was worth more than everything else combined, and suffering brought him into dimensions of that knowledge impossible to access through comfort. During the Great Depression, when thousands questioned God's justice, Cayce's readings emphasized that material loss could become spiritual gain if people would turn to God instead of away from Him. He saw families who lost everything materially but found Christ personally. Their poverty drove them to prayer, to community, to recognition that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. But here's what Cayce warned about most strongly. The greatest danger for righteous people facing injustice isn't the suffering itself. It's becoming bitter toward God. It's letting resentment poison their relationship with the divine. It's starting to believe the lie that God doesn't care, that faith doesn't matter, that goodness isn't rewarded. When suffering produces separation from God instead of drawing us closer to Him, we've turned our trial into tragedy. Cayce pointed to Job, the righteous man who lost everything. Job's friends insisted his suffering proved hidden sin. They believed in simple cause and effect. Good people prosper, bad people suffer. But God Himself contradicted that theology. Job's suffering wasn't punishment. It was a mystery, a divine purpose beyond human understanding. And through it all, Job's relationship with God deepened. By the end of his ordeal, Job said, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." That's the key. Suffering can give us direct experience of God's presence that second-hand faith never provides. When we walk through the valley of the shadow of death and discover God is truly there with us, we know Him in ways impossible to know in sunshine and success. The crucible of suffering either destroys faith or refines it into something unshakable. Cayce taught that Jesus Christ is the pattern for every soul. Christ demonstrated that the path to resurrection runs through crucifixion. The path to glory runs through suffering. The path to exaltation runs through humility. This isn't because God delights in our pain. It's because consciousness itself transforms through these experiences. The soul that can maintain love in the face of hate, peace amid chaos, faith through doubt, that soul is becoming Christ-like. In his readings on life purpose and soul development, Cayce always emphasized that we're not just trying to become better people. We're trying to become living expressions of Christ consciousness. We're meant to be temples of the Holy Spirit, vessels through which God's love pours into the world. This transformation requires more than intellectual agreement with doctrine. It requires the complete restructuring of our consciousness and that only happens through fire. The corrupt person prospering in wickedness is like the seed that falls on rocky soil in Christ's parable. They spring up quickly, enjoying immediate worldly success, but they have no root. When the sun of judgment rises, when the consequences of their choices catch up with them, they wither. They've built their house on sand, and the storms will reveal what they truly have, which is nothing eternal. Meanwhile, the righteous person's suffering is like the seed falling on good soil. They're taking root deeply. Even if that process is slow and hidden and painful, they're building their house on rock. They're storing up treasures in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy. They're investing in their eternal relationship with God rather than temporary worldly success. Cayce was insistent on this point. God isn't measuring success the way humans do. When we stand before the divine, God won't ask about our bank account or social status or worldly achievements. He'll ask what we did with the gift of life. Did we love? Did we serve? Did we seek Him? Did we become more like Christ? Did we use our suffering to develop compassion, our struggles to deepen faith, our trials to demonstrate that His grace is sufficient? The readings revealed that every experience in life, pleasant or painful, just or unjust, is an opportunity to choose God. The person facing prosperity can choose gratitude and generosity, using their abundance to bless others. The person facing suffering can choose faith and perseverance, proving that God is enough, even when everything else is stripped away. Both situations test us, just in different ways. But here's the profound truth Cayce emphasized. Suffering has unique power to reveal God's character and presence. When Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn," He wasn't being paradoxical. He was stating spiritual fact. Those who mourn discover the God of all comfort. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness discover they're being filled with divine presence. Those who are persecuted for doing right discover they're sharing in the fellowship of Christ's sufferings. Throughout his work in Virginia Beach, Cayce witnessed this principle in action repeatedly. People came to him in desperation, facing terminal illness, financial ruin, devastating loss. Many of them had been nominal Christians, believing in God abstractly, but not knowing Him personally. Their suffering drove them to genuine prayer, to crying out to God from the depths of their being. And in that place of absolute dependence, they encountered the living Christ in ways that transformed them completely. Cayce described how suffering burns away the non-essential, leaving only what's real and eternal. When you lose your health, you discover whether you have faith. When you lose your wealth, you discover what you truly valued. When you lose your reputation, you discover whether you're living for God's approval or human opinion. Suffering is a terrible teacher, but what it teaches can't be learned any other way. The question of why evil prospers led Cayce back again and again to the cross. At Calvary, the most evil act in history, the murder of God's innocent Son, became the source of redemption for all humanity. God took the worst thing that could happen and transformed it into the best thing that ever happened. This is what God does. He redeems suffering. He brings resurrection out of crucifixion. He causes all things to work together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. This means your suffering isn't random or meaningless. God isn't absent or indifferent. He's working in ways you cannot see, accomplishing purposes you cannot yet understand, drawing you into depths of relationship with Him that comfort and ease would never produce. The Apostle Peter, whom Cayce often referenced, wrote that we're proven through trials like gold refined by fire, so that our faith might result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Cayce taught that the souls who understand this truth stop asking why me and start asking what is God teaching me through this. They stop demanding that God explain Himself and start trusting that His ways are higher than our ways, His thoughts higher than our thoughts. They stop measuring their lives by worldly standards of success and start measuring by spiritual standards. Am I growing in love? Am I becoming more like Christ? Is my faith deepening? Am I learning to trust God even when I don't understand? The corrupt person prospering doesn't have what they think they have. Jesus asked the piercing question, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? That successful businessman using dishonest practices, that politician lying for power, that person climbing over others to reach the top, They're trading their eternal soul for temporary trash. They're like Esau selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. The transaction seems favorable in the moment, but the consequences are catastrophic. Meanwhile, the righteous person suffering has what the prosperous person can never buy: the presence of God, the peace that passes understanding, the joy that circumstances cannot touch, the hope that doesn't disappoint because it's rooted in God's eternal love. They have Christ Himself dwelling in their hearts. They have the Holy Spirit as their comforter and guide. They have the Father's unfailing love. What could be more valuable than this? Cayce pointed to the heroes of faith described in Hebrews chapter 11. These were people who faced mockery, flogging, chains, imprisonment, stoning, being sawn in two, death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. The world wasn't worthy of them. Did they fail? Did God abandon them? No. They obtained a good testimony through faith, and they're now part of that great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, cheering us on through our own trials. The truth Cayce revealed is that suffering in this world is temporary, but our relationship with God is eternal. The Apostle Paul said our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Momentary doesn't mean the suffering feels brief while we're in it. It means that from eternity's perspective, even a lifetime of suffering is a vapor, a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. But what that suffering produces in our character, in our faith, in our capacity to know and reflect God, that lasts forever. This is why Cayce could look at someone facing terrible injustice and say with absolute confidence, "Trust God." Not because God will necessarily fix your circumstances the way you want, not because suffering will end immediately, but because God is with you in the suffering, working through it, using it to accomplish something beautiful in your eternal soul. He's not causing the evil, but He's certainly using it, transforming it, bringing life out of death, just as He did at the resurrection. The question isn't really why does evil succeed while good suffers? The real question is, who do you become through your response to life's circumstances? Do you let suffering drive you to God or away from Him? Do you let injustice make you bitter or better? Do you let trials destroy your faith or refine it into something precious? Your answer determines everything about your spiritual destiny. Cayce emphasized that Jesus promised to be with us always, even to the end of the age. That means Christ is present in your suffering right now. He's not distant, watching from heaven with detached interest. He's Emmanuel, God with us, walking through the fire with you like He walked with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You're not facing your trials alone. The one who conquered death itself is standing beside you, offering His strength, His peace, His presence. This understanding transforms suffering from senseless tragedy into sacred opportunity. Your pain becomes the place where you encounter God most intimately. Your struggles become the classroom where you learn lessons about faith, dependence, grace, and divine love that prosperity could never teach. Your injustice becomes the canvas on which God paints His faithfulness, proving that He truly does work all things together for good. The corrupt person prospering is actually in grave spiritual danger. Proverbs warns that there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Their success is blinding them to their desperate need for God. They're like the rich fool in Jesus' parable, storing up treasures for themselves while not being rich toward God. They're like the rich young ruler who went away sorrowful because he had great possessions that kept him from following Christ. Cayce taught that God's justice is perfect, but it operates on eternal timescales. The wicked may prosper for a season, for years, even for a lifetime, but they cannot escape the ultimate accounting. They will stand before their Creator, and every secret will be revealed, every motive exposed, every choice evaluated. And they'll discover too late that they traded everything real for nothing lasting, everything eternal for something temporary. But for the righteous who suffer, there's glorious hope. The same Jesus who wept at Lazarus's tomb weeps with you in your pain. The same Savior who healed the sick longs to heal your wounds. The same Lord who raised the dead has resurrection power available for every dead situation in your life. Your present suffering isn't the end of your story. It's not even the most important part. It's the chapter where you learn to trust God in the darkness, preparing you for the light that's coming. If you've stayed with me through this exploration of suffering, faith, and God's mysterious ways, you're ready to take this truth deeper into your heart. Drop a comment right now. How has suffering drawn you closer to God? In what trial did you encounter Christ's presence most powerfully? Share your testimony because it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. I'll mark every comment with a heart because your story of faith matters. And subscribe because understanding God's purposes in suffering will revolutionize how you face every challenge. The gift Cayce offered wasn't easy answers or false comfort. It was the invitation to know God intimately through every circumstance, pleasant or painful. It was the promise that nothing separates us from the love of Christ, not tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, or sword. It was the assurance that the same God who didn't spare his own Son but delivered him up for us all, will also, along with him, graciously give us all things. Your suffering matters to God. Your questions matter. Your pain matters. You're not being punished. You're not forgotten. You're not abandoned. You're being refined, prepared, drawn into deeper relationship with your Creator. The crucible you're in right now is accomplishing something eternal in you, something that will shine for all eternity, something that will cause you to worship God forever for His wisdom, in allowing what He could have prevented. Evil doesn't succeed. It only appears to succeed when we measure by worldly standards and view through temporal lenses. True success is knowing God, becoming like Christ, being filled with the Holy Spirit. True prosperity is having peace with God, purpose in life, and hope for eternity. The corrupt person has none of these regardless of their bank account. The righteous person has all of these regardless of their circumstances. This is Edgar Cayce's Christ-centered answer to humanity's oldest question. We aren't victims of cosmic injustice or divine cruelty. We're beloved children of a perfect Father who's working all things, even suffering and injustice, for our ultimate good and His ultimate glory. Understanding this doesn't remove the pain, but it transforms its meaning. And when suffering has meaning, when it draws us to God, when it refines our faith and deepens our love, it becomes the unlikely pathway to the most profound blessings we could ever receive, knowing God personally, loving Him deeply, and becoming like His Son, Jesus Christ, forever. What if everything you believe about yourself is only a fragment of the truth? What if the image you see in the mirror is just a shadow of what your soul really is? Edgar Cayce said that the greatest illusion of mankind is forgetting its divine origin. You are not a coincidence, not a body wandering through time, not a mind filled with memories. You are a spark of the infinite, a living expression of God's consciousness, temporarily experiencing the limits of matter to rediscover who you truly are. Cayce's readings revealed that the soul carries the memory of eternity, that before this life you already existed, and that within you lies the same creative power that shaped the universe. This video will challenge everything you think you know about identity, destiny, and purpose. Stay until the end, because once you understand this truth, your vision of life will never be the same again. And before we go deeper, leave a comment below. Do you believe you are a soul having a human experience, or a human searching for a soul? Every soul is a fragment of the divine mind, sent into matter to remember its origin. That was the essence of what Edgar Cayce taught. He said that before the beginning of time as we know it, every soul was one with God, sharing in His light, His thought, His purpose. But desire was born, the desire to experience, to create, to know the difference between light and shadow. And so the soul entered the material world, not as punishment but as a sacred opportunity to transform ignorance into wisdom, separation into unity, and fear into love. The body you inhabit is not who you are. It's a temporary garment woven by your choices, your thoughts, and your faith. Cayce said, "The spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. Every thought you hold is a thread connecting you to creation itself. When you forget this, life becomes confusion, pain, and loss. When you remember it, even suffering takes on meaning. Because every trial, every heartbreak, every closed door becomes a mirror, reflecting back the question, will you remember who you are?" Cayce never claimed that faith in God was blind belief. He said it was the recognition of the divine pattern within yourself. To know God is to awaken the Christ within, that eternal consciousness that existed before your birth and will remain after death. You are not trying to become spiritual, you already are. You are remembering the truth that never stopped being true. The world tells you that your worth is measured by success, appearance, or approval. But Cayce reminded us that your soul's value is infinite, even in failure, even in silence. The real transformation begins when you stop asking, "Who am I to deserve God's love?" and start realizing, "I was born from that love." Every moment of anger, doubt, or fear is an opportunity to return to that source. Nothing outside of you can define what was created by the divine. When you stand before the mirror, see beyond your reflection. You are looking at the house of your soul. The eyes that stare back are the same windows through which the Creator experiences His creation. Cayce said that when Jesus walked the earth, He was not showing us what only He could be. He was showing what we all are capable of being. The same Spirit that resurrected Him lives within you now, waiting for your recognition. To see yourself as only flesh is to live in a dream. To see yourself as spirit is to awaken. Pause for a moment and breathe. Feel your heartbeat. That rhythm is the echo of eternity, proof that something greater than biology sustains you. When you pray, you are not sending words into space. You are aligning your frequency with the source that created you. The answer to every prayer begins with the remembrance that you are already one with God. If these words move you, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and comment below what this truth awakens in you. It helps this message reach more souls who forgot who they are. Cayce often said that ignorance of our spiritual nature is the real sin, not evil in itself, but a state of forgetting. Humanity's greatest sickness, he explained, is spiritual amnesia. We wake up each day believing that our story began with birth and will end with death, while in truth, our existence stretches beyond time. The soul does not age. It remembers, learns, and evolves through lifetimes, carrying both the light it cultivated and the shadows it still must transform. That's why some people are born with wisdom beyond their years or fears that seem to have no origin. They are remnants of unfinished lessons. Cayce taught that life is not random. It's a classroom, and every experience, joyful or painful, is part of the soul's curriculum to rediscover its divinity. He often pointed to the words of Jesus, "The kingdom of God is within you." To Cayce, this wasn't poetry, it was literal truth. The kingdom is not in the sky or hidden behind death's door. It is the awakened state of the soul that realizes its oneness with the Creator. When you act with love, forgive, create beauty, or help another, you're not trying to reach God, you're expressing Him. The mind that recognizes this becomes a tool for divine creation. That's why Cayce emphasized the power of thought. He said that every thought is a vibration that shapes the unseen world before manifesting in the seen. If your thoughts are born of fear, you build chains. If they are born of love, you build wings. But this truth is often too simple for the human ego to accept. The mind wants control, proof, and recognition. Yet, the spirit asks only for surrender. Cayce explained that the true awakening happens when you stop seeking God as something distant and start living as a vessel through which God expresses Himself. Every act of kindness, every prayer whispered in silence, is the Creator remembering Himself through you. When you realize this, humility replaces pride, peace replaces anxiety, and life becomes sacred again. Still, remembering who you are is not easy. The world distracts you with noise, fear, and endless desires. It tells you that you are never enough, that happiness must be earned, and that your value depends on comparison. But the moment you silence the world and turn inward, you hear the whisper that has been there since your soul's first breath. You are mine, and I am yours. Cayce said that communion with God is not reserved for saints or prophets. It is the natural state of every awakened soul. Prayer and meditation are not duties, they are homecomings. Take a deep breath and reflect. How often do you mistake the temporary for the eternal? How many times have you sought love from those who could not give it, while the source of love waited within? To Cayce, the greatest tragedy was not death, but but living without awareness of spirit. And yet every moment offers redemption. No matter how far you've drifted, the path back to God is never more than a thought away. A single sincere prayer can shift lifetimes of forgetting. Cayce believed that remembering your true nature was the key to healing, not only of the body but of the soul itself. He said that disease often begins in the spirit long before it touches the flesh. When the mind lives in separation, guilt, or resentment, the body mirrors that imbalance. But when the soul reconnects to its source, even the cells begin to awaken. Healing, in Cayce's understanding, was not the act of curing symptoms, but the process of restoring harmony between the spirit, mind, and body. He would often remind people that Jesus healed through recognition, not of sickness, but of divine perfection hidden beneath the illusion of pain. The Christ consciousness sees beyond the wound and speaks directly to the truth. You are already whole. This same principle applies to every area of life. The conflicts you face, the emptiness you feel, the constant search for meaning, all of them are signs pointing you back to the forgotten truth of who you are. Cayce never separated spirituality from daily living. He said that God is present in every thought, every decision, every act of compassion. To live spiritually is not to escape the world, but to transform it through your awareness of God in all things. Every encounter, every stranger, every challenge is a chance to express divine love. When you begin to see the world this way, even the smallest act, a kind word, a moment of patience, becomes sacred. But to live this truth, you must confront the illusions you've built. Cayce taught that fear is the great deceiver. It disguises itself as caution, pride, or logic, but its only purpose is to keep you asleep. Fear whispers that you are alone, that God has forgotten you, that life is meaningless. Yet every time you choose faith over fear, the illusion weakens. Faith is not denial, it is remembrance. It's the quiet certainty that even in chaos, God is still present, and that your soul is never abandoned. When Jesus calmed the storm, he wasn't just speaking to the waves outside. He was teaching us to calm the storms within. Cayce said that when you recognize Christ within yourself, you begin to see him in others. Judgment fades, hatred loses its power. You start to understand that the soul of every person you meet, even those who hurt you, is on the same long journey back to God. That's why forgiveness is one of the highest forms of spiritual intelligence. To forgive is not to excuse. It is to free yourself from the illusion of separation. When you forgive, you affirm that love is stronger than pain, and in that act, you reflect the nature of the Creator himself. And maybe that's the greatest hidden truth of all, that God is not somewhere beyond the stars, but pulsing within your very being. That the light you're searching for has never left you. That heaven is not a destination, but a recognition. If these words resonate with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your interaction helps this message of awakening reach more people who are searching for the same truth, the divine spark within. Cayce often reminded those who sought his help that the purpose of life was not comfort but growth. Every test, every disappointment, every loss is allowed by the soul itself as an opportunity to awaken. You are not a victim of fate. You are the author of your evolution. Before this incarnation, your soul chose specific experiences to strengthen the virtues it still lacked: patience, compassion, humility, faith. To the human mind, this may sound cruel, but to the soul, it is mercy. Through the fire of experience, spirit becomes purified. Cayce said that even the darkest seasons of our lives are part of a larger harmony the mind cannot yet see. When you look back years later, you often realize that what once felt like punishment was actually preparation. This understanding changes the way you see pain. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this teaching my soul?" That simple shift is where spiritual maturity begins. Cayce's readings made it clear that no suffering is wasted when met with awareness. Every heartbreak invites deeper love. Every failure humbles the ego and opens the heart to grace. Even illness can be a teacher, revealing what the soul has neglected. The spirit does not seek pleasure, it seeks evolution. And when you align yourself with that purpose, Even adversity becomes sacred. Still, the human heart forgets. It doubts, it fears, it wants control. Cayce's own life was filled with trials, yet he never stopped serving. He saw every person who came to him as a child of God, regardless of their mistakes. His message was never about condemnation, but remembrance. He once said, "You are gods in the making." Not in arrogance, but in potential. You are designed to reflect the Creator's love in form, to bring light into darkness, and to become a living testimony that spirit is stronger than matter. When Jesus said, "The works that I do shall ye do also," he was not offering poetry. He was revealing destiny. The tragedy of our age is that people seek God everywhere except within. They search for signs, prophets, miracles, forgetting that the greatest revelation is already breathing inside them. Cayce warned that a world that forgets spirit will drown in confusion, no matter how advanced its science becomes. The true evolution of humanity, he said, would not come through machines or intellect, but through the awakening of conscience. When mankind remembers its divine origin, wars will end, greed will lose its grip, and peace will no longer be a dream, but a natural expression of who we are. The return of Christ, Cayce explained, would not be a single event witnessed by the eyes, but a transformation witnessed by the heart. The Christ consciousness awakening within humanity. It begins not in temples or churches, but in the quiet room of your own soul when you finally remember, I and the Father are one. That realization, once lived, changes everything. Cayce taught that the most sacred prayer is not spoken with the lips, but lived through the heart. Every act of kindness, every moment of patience, every silent forgiveness becomes a form of worship. He said that the highest form of prayer is aligning the will of the self with the will of the Creator. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions reflect divine love, you are no longer begging for miracles. You are becoming one. Many of Cayce's readings emphasize that true faith is active. It must move, build, and serve. He would say that God cannot work through idle hearts. The divine light within you must flow, or it will fade beneath layers of doubt and fear. You were created to express that light, to share it, to multiply it. So many souls wander through life feeling empty, believing God is distant or silent. But Cayce said that silence is not absence, it's invitation. When life becomes quiet, it's not because God stopped speaking, it's because He's waiting for you to listen. In those still moments between thoughts, you meet Him. You begin to feel that gentle pull calling you home, to remember that you were never truly lost. You may have sinned, failed, and fallen, but the essence of who you are has never been stained. The divine spark cannot be destroyed, it can only be forgotten. And in remembering it, you redeem every mistake you've ever made. The teachings of Cayce bring us back to that central truth Jesus lived and died for, that love is stronger than death. The soul cannot be killed, and its destiny is eternal return to the source. Every lifetime, every relationship, every test brings you closer to that reunion. You are not here to earn salvation. You are here to awaken it. The Christ within you is not a metaphor, but a living presence, waiting for your recognition. When you love without expectation, forgive without resistance, and serve without seeking reward, you are living proof of God on earth. Look at your own life now, the people you've met, the trials you've faced, the dreams that keep calling you forward. Do you really think any of it is random? Cayce said that every soul you meet has crossed your path before, drawn again by unfinished lessons or unspoken promises. Life is a divine choreography. Even in chaos, there is purpose. Even in endings, there is grace. The more you trust that, the more clearly you'll see the fingerprints of God over every page of your story. And when that awareness becomes permanent, fear disappears. Death loses its sting, because you finally understand. You were never just a person searching for meaning. You are meaning itself, wearing a human face. Remember this truth and live it daily. If this message speaks to your soul, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below sharing what part of Cayce's wisdom touched you most. Together, we keep his light alive and help others remember who they truly are. And this remembrance, this awakening, is what Cayce believed would one day unite all of humanity. He said that the divisions between religions, races, and nations exist only in minds that have forgotten spirit. When you look through the eyes of the soul, you see that there is only one family, the children of God, each walking their unique path back to the same home. No creed or church owns the truth. The living Christ can be found in every act of mercy, every moment of compassion, every breath of forgiveness. Cayce warned that the greatest danger of organized belief was forgetting the living presence behind the words. Scriptures, he said, are not to be worshipped but lived. They are roadmaps, not walls. The Bible, when read with spirit, becomes a mirror where the divine reflects itself through you. He often reminded people that Jesus did not come to build a religion. He came to awaken a relationship. His message was not about doctrine, but transformation. Cayce described Christ as the pattern for every soul that seeks the Father. When you live in that pattern, you don't just believe in Jesus, you begin to embody his consciousness. The meekness, the compassion, the courage, the forgiveness, these are not ideals to admire, but states of being to practice. Every time you choose love instead of resentment, you walk the same path he did. That is the true meaning of following Christ. But the modern world has replaced reflection with distraction. Cayce foresaw a time when people would be surrounded by noise, obsessed with material comfort, and yet feel emptier than ever before. He warned that technological progress without spiritual awakening would lead to confusion and despair. And that's exactly where we stand today. Billions connected through screens, yet starving for meaning. The cure is not outside, it is within. When you return to silence and reconnect with your Creator, you begin to radiate peace that no system can provide. Cayce said that one awakened soul has more power to transform the world than 1,000 who live asleep. So the question is, will you remember who you really are? The world will keep trying to convince you that you are small, powerless, temporary. But the soul inside you knows the truth. You are an eternal being, born of divine intention, placed here to manifest love in a realm that has forgotten it. You were sent to be light in darkness, to remind others through your presence that God never left them. And when you live that truth, heaven is not a promise, it becomes a reality unfolding through you. Everything you've been searching for, peace, meaning, connection, it's already within. You don't need to chase it. You only need to remember it. That's the hidden truth Edgar Cayce devoted his life to sharing. That's the message Jesus lived to reveal. The soul that knows this cannot be enslaved by fear again. Let it sink deeply into your heart. You are not lost. You are awakening. What if everything you've been taught about your soul is only half the truth? Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, revealed something that completely redefines how we understand who we are. He said your soul and your spirit are not the same, and that one of them carries the eternal spark of God, while the other holds the story of every life you've ever lived. This distinction changes everything: how you see death, reincarnation, heaven, and even your purpose on earth. Cayce explained that the spirit is the divine essence that can never be corrupted, but the soul is the traveler. It learns, fails, grows, and carries the record of your choices across lifetimes. Most people live their entire lives without ever realizing this difference. And that ignorance, he said, keeps the soul trapped in confusion and pain. What would change in your life if you finally understood who you really are? Leave a comment below sharing what you believe the soul truly is. Now let's uncover what Edgar Cayce discovered about the shocking difference between your soul and your spirit. For Edgar Cayce, the difference between the soul and the spirit wasn't a theory, it was a divine revelation that came through hundreds of his documented readings. When he entered a deep trance, Cayce could access what he called the Akashic Records, a spiritual archive where every thought, action, and emotion of every soul was preserved. From that sacred dimension, he saw that the human being is not one thing but three: body, soul, and spirit. The body is the temporary garment, the vessel through which the soul experiences material life. The spirit is the spark of God, pure, perfect, unchangeable. And between them, the soul acts as the bridge, the link that connects divine consciousness to human experience. Cayce said the soul carries both the memory of God and the scars of time. It is the part of you that learns, falls, loves, suffers, and grows through countless incarnations, always seeking to become one again with its spiritual source. The spirit, in Cayce's words, never sins, never fears, and never dies. It is the image of the Creator within you, but the soul shaped by free will can either reflect that light or hide from it. Every thought, every emotion, every action is a stroke on the canvas of your soul. That's why Cayce insisted that salvation isn't about escaping the world, but transforming it from within, through choices that align the soul with the spirit's purity. He warned that when the soul forgets its divine origin, it becomes restless, anxious, and lost in material illusions. But when it remembers that the Spirit of God lives within, everything changes. Life becomes a classroom instead of a battlefield, and suffering becomes a lesson instead of punishment. Cayce explained that this misunderstanding, the confusion between soul and spirit, is what keeps humanity spiritually asleep. We worship the outer, but we forget the inner. We pray for signs, while the eternal spirit inside us whispers constantly, waiting for us to listen. He often said that Jesus Christ was the perfect example of what it means to live as a soul fully surrendered to the Spirit. Christ's life showed that the divine and the human can coexist in harmony when love governs the will. To Cayce, the Christ Spirit wasn't limited to one man. It was the potential hidden in every human soul, the possibility of awakening the divine essence within. That's why he urged people to stop seeking God only in churches, books, or rituals, and start seeking Him within the silence of their own hearts. "The kingdom of God is within you," he repeated, echoing the same words that Christ spoke. But finding it requires discipline, humility, and daily communion with that inner voice. Meditation, prayer, forgiveness, and acts of compassion were not just moral advice for Cayce. They were ways of remembering the soul's true identity. Every time you choose love over judgment, you lift your soul closer to the vibration of your spirit. Every time you serve someone selflessly, you allow the Spirit of God to act through you. When people asked Cayce if the soul and spirit were the same, he would say, "The spirit is life. The soul is the record of that life." That simple phrase carried profound meaning. Your spirit is what gives you existence, the divine breath that animates your being. Your soul is the story that breath has written through ages of experience. Understanding this, Cayce said, changes the way you see yourself and others. You stop judging people for their flaws because you begin to see them as souls in different stages of remembering who they are. You realize that even those lost in darkness carry the same spirit that lives in you, the same spark of the Creator. Cayce explained that the soul is like a traveler crossing vast landscapes of experience, lifetime after lifetime, always carrying fragments of light and shadow within. Every act of kindness expands the soul's light, and every act of selfishness darkens it, but neither can ever extinguish the spirit inside. The spirit remains untouched, eternal, radiant, and one with God. The soul's purpose, according to Cayce, is to gradually become aware of that inner perfection and reflect it more purely with each incarnation. He said that this journey is not a punishment, but a divine opportunity. Each lifetime is a classroom, each challenge a teacher, each relationship a mirror showing where love still needs to grow. When you begin to see life this way, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach my soul?" That shift in perception is what Cayce called awakening. He also warned that many souls lose themselves in material ambition, believing that happiness is found in wealth, fame, or power. But these, he said, are only shadows that fade. True fulfillment is spiritual alignment, the state where the soul no longer resists the will of the spirit. He compared it to tuning an instrument. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions vibrate in harmony with your divine essence, peace flows naturally. That's when you feel the presence of God, not as an idea, but as a living force guiding every breath. Cayce believed this harmony was what Christ lived perfectly. Jesus didn't come to show superiority, but to show what it looks like when the human will is one with divine purpose. When people asked Cayce how to strengthen their connection to the Spirit, his answer was always simple but profound. Live with love. Love, he said, is the language of God, the vibration of the Spirit itself. Every act of love aligns the soul with its source. Forgive those who hurt you, because forgiveness dissolves the barriers that block that divine current. Pray not to change God's mind, but to open your heart to His. Meditate, not to escape reality, but to listen to the still small voice within that always knows the truth. He explained that God never stops speaking, but most of us live surrounded by so much noise that we forget how to hear Him. The soul rediscovers peace the moment it listens again. That is why Cayce said that spiritual growth is not about acquiring more knowledge. It's about remembering what you already are. Beneath your fears, your desires, your doubts, there is a quiet awareness untouched by time or pain. That is your spirit. When you act from that awareness, even in small ways, offering comfort to a stranger, showing patience instead of anger, you are living as a soul guided by the Spirit. Every time you choose compassion, you move one step closer to God's light. If this message speaks to your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because together we are building a community of souls learning to live through Spirit. Cayce also spoke about the moments after death, when the soul leaves the body and becomes fully aware of its own record. The spirit, still pure, watches as the soul reviews the story it has written. There is no external judgment, only the deep recognition of truth, the realization of how your choices aligned or resisted the divine will. The soul feels the joy of every act of love and the weight of every missed opportunity to express it. But even then, God does not condemn. He calls the soul to continue its journey toward light. That's why Cayce emphasized mercy and grace as the essence of divine justice. The Spirit never punishes, the Spirit only invites. Cayce often reminded his followers that spiritual awakening is not a sudden miracle, but a daily discipline. He said that even small, consistent acts of love and prayer can awaken the soul more deeply than years of religious study without humility. He explained that faith without action is incomplete, because the soul must express what it knows. The Spirit gives life, he said, but the soul must choose how to use it. That means every thought, every emotion, every decision carries spiritual consequence. When you think with anger, you cloud your soul's light. When you think with love, you let God shine through you. Cayce believed that our world reflects the collective condition of humanity's soul, which is why healing yourself contributes to healing the planet. He urged everyone to begin within, to forgive, to pray, to be still, to love, and to remember that the Spirit is not outside reaching in, but within reaching out. He taught that the body, too, responds to the alignment between soul and spirit. Many of his readings connected illness to spiritual imbalance, showing that resentment, guilt, and fear can manifest as physical suffering. But the cure, he said, is not only medical, it is spiritual. When the soul finds peace, the body follows. He described healing as a natural consequence of harmony between the divine and the human. This is why he encouraged prayer not just for health, but for understanding. To Cayce, every illness was a message, a gentle reminder to realign the soul with its source. And every healing was evidence of God's Spirit still moving through creation. When people asked if the Spirit could ever be lost, Cayce was clear. The Spirit cannot be destroyed, but the soul can forget it. Forgetfulness is what he called spiritual sleep. The soul wanders through experiences, building identities and desires, mistaking temporary pleasures for eternal joy. But at some point, every soul begins to hunger for something higher. That hunger is the call of the Spirit awakening within. It might appear as a moment of pain, loss, or crisis, but beneath it is grace, guiding the soul back to remembrance. Cayce said that suffering is not divine punishment, it is divine permission, the universe allowing the soul to rediscover what truly matters. He also said that Jesus was not a distant figure to be worshipped, but a living example to be followed. To Cayce, the Christ Spirit is the pattern that every soul can awaken to. "Let the mind of Christ be in you," he would quote. The Christ consciousness, he explained, is not an exclusive gift. It is the natural state of the Spirit when it fully expresses through the soul. When you forgive your enemies, when you love without expecting return, when you serve with joy, you are already living in Christ consciousness. The Spirit in you and the Spirit of God become one vibration. That unity is the goal of existence, to let God live through you so fully that fear disappears and love becomes your nature. Cayce said that this is salvation, not through belief alone but through transformation. Cayce explained that the greatest tragedy of humanity is forgetting its divine origin. He saw that most people pray to a distant God while carrying that same God within. "You are a spiritual being having a human experience," he said, long before those words became popular. This wasn't poetry. It was literal truth. The spirit within you is the fragment of the Creator, and when the soul lives in harmony with that truth, life gains purpose, direction, and peace. Cayce believed that sin is simply separation, the moment the soul acts without awareness of its spirit. Every selfish choice, every lie, every cruelty is a symptom of that forgetfulness. But the moment you remember that God lives through you, you stop fearing death, you stop comparing yourself to others, and you begin to live with quiet certainty that you are loved beyond measure. The Spirit doesn't condemn the soul for wandering. It patiently waits for the soul to awaken and return home. He often said that we do not earn heaven. It's already within us. The task is not to climb toward God, but to uncover what blocks our awareness of Him. Pride, anger, and guilt are the clouds that hide the light, but prayer and service clear the sky. Cayce taught that the most powerful prayer is not asking for miracles, but saying, "Use me, Lord." When the soul prays this way, the Spirit flows freely, healing wounds, softening hearts, and restoring purpose. He saw this alignment as the true meaning of redemption, not escaping sin, but transforming it into wisdom. Even the darkest experiences become sacred when the soul learns from them. Cayce said that God wastes nothing, not even pain, because every tear can become light if the soul chooses to understand. He also taught that the earth itself is a school for the soul. Every challenge, every joy, every heartbreak has meaning in the divine plan. The people you love and the people who test you are all instruments of growth. Some souls come into your life to teach you compassion. Others come to mirror your own weaknesses so you can heal them. Once you see this, judgment fades. You realize that everyone is doing the best they can from their level of awareness. This doesn't mean excusing wrongdoing, but understanding that the remedy is always love. Cayce said that love is the one force that survives death, and that the connections built in love continue in the next world. The soul that learns to love purely has already touched heaven. He reminded his followers that Christ never promised an easy path. The cross, he said, symbolizes the meeting point between human will and divine will. To follow Christ is to surrender to the Spirit within and allow it to guide even when the way is uncertain. The more the soul yields, the more the Spirit shines. That surrender is not weakness, it's power. The world teaches control, but God teaches trust. And when you trust, the burden lifts. You begin to live as Cayce described, not as a body struggling to find the Spirit, but as a spirit using a body to express divine love. That realization alone can transform the way you see life, death, and eternity. Cayce's message was never meant to create followers. It was meant to awaken children of God who had forgotten their origin. He said that if every person truly understood the difference between the soul and the spirit, war, hate, and division would end. Because once you recognize that everyone carries the same divine essence, judgment becomes impossible. The spirit in you is the same spirit in your neighbor, in your enemy, in the stranger you overlook. We are many souls, but one spirit. The illusion of separation is what causes all suffering, and the remembrance of unity is what brings salvation. That's why Cayce insisted that love is not an emotion, it's a spiritual law. The more you live in harmony with that law, the freer your soul becomes. You stop reacting with fear and start responding with understanding. You realize that every conflict is just the soul's struggle to remember the peace it already possesses. In his final years, Cayce said the future of humanity depended on whether souls would awaken to their divine nature or remain asleep in material darkness. He saw that the coming age would test our collective faith. Technology would grow, but only a few would keep the wisdom to use it for love. He warned that the world's salvation would not come from politics or power, but from individuals who live as examples of spirit-led lives. Each person who forgives, who prays, who loves without reason, becomes a light pushing back the world's shadow. He called this the return of the Christ consciousness, not one man descending from the sky, but millions of souls remembering their divine spirit within. To Cayce, the soul and spirit are not two separate forces fighting inside us. They are a dance. The spirit provides the music. The soul learns the steps. Every mistake, every success, every moment of forgiveness refines that dance until it becomes graceful again. The day you stop identifying with your pain and start identifying with your purpose, you begin to live as spirit in form. The voice of God, once distant, becomes intimate. You feel guided not because you are special, but because you are finally listening. That is the transformation Cayce lived and wanted others to experience. A faith so real that it turns knowledge into love and love into service. Before we close, remember what Cayce taught. The spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. Your life right now is the reflection of your soul's construction. If you want to see change, build differently. Think with kindness, act with faith, and speak with love. The soul transforms through practice, not theory. And when it finally mirrors the purity of the spirit, peace flows effortlessly. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "I and the Father are one." You were never meant to reach God someday. You were meant to reveal him today through every thought and every action. If this message touched your soul, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your reflections in the comments. Your voice might awaken someone else's spirit. That, according to Edgar Cayce, the souls that exist today, yours, mine, and everyone's, may not have been created one by one, but instead were part of a single, profound act of creation that happened all at once. This idea alone is enough to shake centuries of religious interpretation and philosophical debate. Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, spoke of a beginning where all souls were formed together, radiating from one divine source, each carrying a spark of the infinite. And the question is, if we were all created at the same time, what does that mean about our journey, our individuality, and the struggles we face every day? Before we go further, let me ask you, do you believe all souls were created simultaneously, or do you think they emerged across time? Share your perspective in the comments. I'll heart every single one because your thoughts matter here. And while you're at it, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who seeks spiritual answers. Together we're building a community that questions, learns, and grows. Cayce's readings went beyond the conventional. During a session in Virginia Beach in the early 1930s, a period marked by despair and economic collapse, a family came seeking answers. They wanted to understand suffering, destiny, and the invisible forces shaping their lives. In trance, Cayce described something breathtaking. The souls were not created in fragments, but in unity. This wasn't about human birth, but about spiritual origin. He explained that before material existence, there was a moment of divine intention where all souls came forth, equal in essence, limitless in potential, and yet free to choose. That freedom would define everything, the rise, the fall, the mistakes, and the triumphs. Think about the weight of this statement. If every soul came from the same moment, then the person you resent, the one you admire, and the one you've never met share the same root as you. This teaching carried a radical implication. No soul is more important, more ancient, or more valuable than another. In a world structured by hierarchy and power, Cayce's words were subversive. He painted a vision of humanity as a single spiritual family, where the differences we obsess over are temporary layers covering a timeless truth. This doesn't mean Cayce dismissed individuality. Quite the opposite. He said individuality is the very stage where the soul expresses its freedom. But the essence, the eternal part, is shared. This is why he often emphasized service to others, because helping another is, in reality, honoring the same source from which you yourself emerged. This truth, if accepted, could transform how we treat our neighbors, strangers, and even our enemies. It suggests that hatred, prejudice, and division are not only destructive, they are illusions that cover the deeper unity of creation. During one of his most impactful readings in 1932, Cayce stunned a group by declaring that all souls were created at the same time. For those present, who had been raised in traditions that saw humanity as unfolding across eras, with some closer to God and others farther, it was almost unthinkable. But Cayce wasn't speaking to win arguments. He was revealing a cosmic memory accessed in trance. He spoke of a moment when spirit emanated from God, not as separate fragments, but as a collective burst of life. Imagine a single radiant sun casting out infinite rays. Each ray is unique in direction, strength, and reach, but all come from the same source. That was Cayce's vision of the soul's origin, and in that analogy lies both comfort and responsibility. Comfort, because none of us is forgotten or left behind. Responsibility, because each ray carries the duty of returning, purified and conscious, to the source. This idea also sparked controversy. Critics argued it stripped religion of hierarchy, of chosen peoples, of favored groups. Cayce never denied cultural differences or sacred traditions, but he placed them in a larger frame. Humanity's story is not about a single tribe or nation being superior. It's about the collective soul family struggling to remember its origin. And this is why his teachings on reincarnation were so tightly connected. If all souls were created at once, then reincarnation wasn't about producing new souls. It was about old souls returning again and again to refine themselves. Life wasn't a one-time test, but a long journey where lessons could be repeated until learned. And this was revolutionary for people in Hopkinsville or New York, hearing these messages during the Depression or wartime. In times when people were desperate for meaning, Cayce gave them a vision of eternity, where no one is abandoned and every struggle has purpose. Cayce explained that the real tragedy was not that we were created imperfect, but that in our freedom, souls chose to wander away from their divine origin. In trance, he described this as the moment when souls, curious about matter, began to experiment with physicality. This choice wasn't evil in itself, it was exploration. But as some souls became more entangled in material desires, they drifted from the awareness of their unity. That's when the illusion of separation began, and with it came conflict, fear, and suffering. This was not a punishment from God, but a natural consequence of free will. Imagine children leaving home, exploring the wilderness, and forgetting where they came from. That, in Cayce's vision, was humanity's state, and through lifetime after lifetime, we are slowly remembering. Each incarnation, no matter how painful, becomes a classroom, guiding us back to the source. In one reading that deeply moved those present, Cayce said, "The purpose of the material world is that the soul may find its way back to its maker." This single sentence redefined existence for many. If all souls were created together, then life was never about competition for God's attention. It was about awakening to a truth we all share. During the Great Depression, when people lined up for bread and prayed for hope, Cayce reminded them that their worth was not measured by success or failure, wealth or poverty, but by the inner growth of the soul. This message carried healing power, because it told those who felt forgotten that they were part of the same divine beginning as kings and prophets. The playing field of eternity was level, and the journey was universal. Skeptics often challenged Cayce. If all souls were created at once, why do some seem more advanced, wiser, or spiritually gifted? Cayce responded with clarity. He explained that though creation was simultaneous, the choices each soul made shaped their development. Just as students in a classroom start together, but progress at different speeds, so do souls advance based on how they use their free will. Some embrace service, love, and humility, accelerating their growth. Others get stuck in cycles of pride, selfishness, or violence, needing more lifetimes to unlearn what separates them from their source. But none are lost forever. According to Cayce, God's love is infinite, and every soul will eventually find its way home. This perspective brought both accountability and hope. You are free to choose, but every choice echoes across lifetimes until it harmonizes with divine will. This understanding also illuminated Cayce's teachings on equality. He spoke often about how people should not judge others based on race, class, or religion. For him, these were temporary conditions of a single incarnation, not eternal measures of value. In Virginia Beach, when asked about racial divisions, he reminded people that the soul has no color. This statement, radical in the 1930s and 40s, cut through prejudice with spiritual truth. If all souls were created in unity, then divisions were illusions. This doesn't erase the reality of suffering caused by inequality, but it reframes it. Oppression and injustice are not reflections of divine will, but consequences of human misuse of freedom. And that means humanity has the power to change. Cayce's vision encouraged responsibility, not just for personal choices, but for collective ones, urging communities to reflect the unity of their origin. One of the most compelling aspects of Cayce's view was how it transformed the question of destiny. If souls were all created at the same time, then no one was born by accident and no one was expendable. Each life, no matter how brief or troubled, carried eternal significance. This was especially comforting for families who came to Cayce after losing loved ones. During the war years, when mothers in Virginia Beach or New York feared for their sons overseas, Cayce reassured them that the soul's journey was bigger than a single lifetime. Death was not the end, it was simply a return to the classroom between lessons. He emphasized that every soul, whether soldier, farmer, or child, carried the same divine spark, and that spark was indestructible. This message gave meaning to grief, reminding people that their loved ones were still part of the great spiritual family, still progressing, still alive in eternity. The idea of simultaneous creation also reshaped how people thought about time itself. For Cayce, eternity wasn't a straight line stretching endlessly forward. It was more like a vast ocean where all souls existed together, each wave moving differently, but all connected to the same body. In trance, he described the human struggle with time as an illusion, necessary for learning but not ultimate reality. Souls, he said, were timeless, existing before birth and continuing after death. What we call past and future were just perspectives from inside the material world. Imagine being inside a train looking at the scenery passing by. To you, things appear to move sequentially. But from above, someone watching the whole track sees beginning and end at once. That's how Cayce suggested God sees the soul's journey. Complete, whole and simultaneous, even as we live it moment by moment. This understanding was challenging for many who came from traditional religious backgrounds. If all souls were created at once, then where does the concept of new life fit in? Cayce clarified that while new bodies are constantly being born, the soul inhabiting that body is ancient, already carrying layers of experience. This perspective reframed ideas of fate, destiny, and even injustice. A child born into wealth and privilege, and another born into poverty and hardship, were not created at different times with different worth. They were souls on different stages of their journey, learning different lessons chosen or shaped by past actions. Far from diminishing the importance of compassion, this teaching made it essential. Because if all souls were created together, then indifference to another's suffering was like ignoring your own reflection in a mirror. In one particularly moving session that changed the life of a family, Cayce spoke about the loss of a child. He told them the soul was not gone, nor was it newly created, but part of the same eternal moment of origin. The child's brief life was a chapter, not the full book. This comforted them deeply, for it meant their grief wasn't about separation forever, but about temporary distance. The soul, Cayce assured, would continue learning and growing, meeting them again in different forms, until the great reunion with the Source. This is why his teachings on reincarnation always came tied to love and responsibility. If we were all created together, then in every face we meet, we encounter a soul who began the journey at the same instant as we did. That realization, if taken seriously, dissolves the pride that makes us believe we are ahead of others. Cayce's vision also pointed toward a collective destiny. He often said that humanity's progress was not just about individuals finding God, but about groups, nations, and even civilizations awakening together. This is where his readings about Atlantis came in. He claimed that many souls alive in the 20th century had once lived in that ancient civilization, carrying karmic lessons into their present lives. Whether people accepted Atlantis as literal or symbolic, the point was clear. Souls don't evolve in isolation. We rise and fall together, shaped by shared histories and collective choices. If all souls were created at once, then our fates are intertwined. This is why service and compassion are not optional virtues, but survival strategies for the soul. What you do for another soul is ultimately done for yourself, because at the level of origin, there is no separation. These teachings unsettled the scientific minds of his time. During the war years, psychologists and theologians debated whether Cayce's visions were credible or hallucinations. Yet what kept people returning to him was not abstract theory, but the transformative power of his message. People left his sessions with hope, with a sense of dignity restored, with courage to face another day. The idea that every soul was born in the same divine act made them feel less alone, less lost in the chaos of history. For soldiers preparing for battle, for families struggling with hunger, for those mourning loved ones, Cayce's words gave them a larger framework. Life had meaning, suffering had purpose, and death was not the end. In that sense, whether or not one accepted every detail, the impact was undeniable. His readings changed how people lived, loved, and faced the unknown. One of the most striking consequences of Cayce's teaching on the simultaneous creation of souls is how it reframes human conflict. If we were all created together, then wars, prejudice, and hatred are essentially battles against our own brothers and sisters. Cayce often emphasized that the greatest challenge of the soul is not survival but learning cooperation. He described humanity's divisions as symptoms of forgetting our origin. When we forget that every enemy began the journey at the same moment we did, we justify cruelty. But when we remember, compassion becomes not just a virtue but a necessity. In trance, Cayce once said, "You cannot harm another without harming yourself." This was more than moral advice. It was a spiritual law rooted in the reality of shared creation. Every act of kindness or cruelty echoes across the web of souls, eventually returning to the one who sent it out. This teaching found practical expression in how Cayce counseled individuals. During a session that left an indelible mark on those present, he advised a man bitter with resentment toward his business rivals. Cayce told him that his enemies were not obstacles placed by chance, but souls journeying alongside him since the very beginning. Their conflicts, Cayce explained, were opportunities for growth, not eternal separations. The man was stunned because he realized he had been fighting not strangers, but companions from the same divine moment of origin. This shifted his perspective, transforming bitterness into humility. Cayce's ability to link the metaphysical truth of simultaneous creation with the daily struggles of ordinary people gave his message unique power. It wasn't abstract philosophy, it was guidance for living with greater awareness. Another layer of this teaching emerged when Cayce spoke about the destiny of humanity as a whole. He described human history as cycles of forgetting and remembering, where souls would plunge into material pursuits and then rise again into spiritual awareness. If all souls were created at once, then no civilization is truly new. Instead, each represents a stage in the collective memory of humanity. When he spoke of Atlantis, he wasn't simply recounting legends. He was pointing out that many of the same souls who once misused power in ancient times were alive again in modern society, facing the same temptations. The collapse of civilizations was not divine punishment, but the result of choices made by souls who forgot their unity. And the rebirth of civilizations, too, was an opportunity for the same souls to choose differently, to realign with their origin. This perspective carries a sobering message for us today. If all souls were created together, then the crises of our era, climate change, inequality, violence, are not isolated problems of a few. They are collective lessons for the entire soul family. Cayce's voice, though rooted in the 20th century, speaks directly into the 21st. What happens to one part of humanity eventually touches all, because we share the same beginning and the same end. It challenges us to see beyond personal survival into the reality of shared destiny. For Cayce, spirituality was never about escaping the world, but transforming it. Remembering that we were created together calls us to act with responsibility, not only for our own sake, but for the generations to come. The emotional depth of this teaching was felt most strongly in the stories of personal healing that emerged from Cayce's sessions. People came to him not only for physical remedies, but for answers about their place in the universe. Imagine sitting in a small room in Virginia Beach, listening to a man in trance describe your soul as ancient, eternal, and equal to every other. For many, this dissolved lifelong feelings of insignificance. They walked away believing their suffering was not meaningless, but part of a larger tapestry woven since the beginning of time. This sense of dignity and belonging changed lives. It gave people strength to endure poverty, illness, or grief, because they felt connected to something greater than their immediate pain. Cayce also linked the origin of souls to what he called the records of time, or what many came to understand as the Akashic Records. In trance, he often described accessing these records as if opening a vast library, where the entire journey of every soul could be seen. If all souls were created at the same moment, then the Akashic Records were the ongoing documentation of how each one expressed its freedom. Every choice, every act of kindness or cruelty, every step toward or away from the source was written there. For seekers, this was both humbling and empowering. It meant nothing was lost and nothing could be hidden. It also meant that growth was always possible, because even mistakes became part of the soul's learning curve. Cayce reminded people that the goal was not perfection in a single life, but awakening across many lifetimes until remembrance of unity was complete. During a session in the early 1940s, at a time when the world was engulfed in war, Cayce explained to a grieving mother that her son who had died in combat was not lost to nothingness. He was, in fact, continuing his journey, returning to the source step by step, just like every other soul created in that original moment. She asked if his death had meaning, if the sacrifice was not in vain. Cayce responded that while war is always a tragedy born of human forgetting, the soul itself is indestructible, and every experience, even suffering, can be redeemed as part of growth. His words gave her peace because they placed her son's story inside the larger story of all souls. She was no longer alone in her grief. She was connected to the eternal family of creation. Cayce's vision invited people to look at their lives with new eyes. Struggles that seemed random began to look like lessons. Relationships that felt unbearable began to look like opportunities to practice patience, forgiveness, or courage. He reminded people that since all souls were created at once, no encounter was truly accidental. Every meeting, whether with a loved one or a difficult person, was part of a pattern woven since the dawn of spiritual creation. This is why he placed such importance on love. Love was not just an emotion, but the force that reminded souls of their origin. To love was to remember, to hate was to forget. For him, love was the most practical way to accelerate the soul's journey back to God. This teaching was not always easy to hear. For those suffering deeply, being told that their pain was part of a larger plan could feel overwhelming. Yet Cayce never dismissed suffering. Instead, he acknowledged it as real, as heavy, but also as meaningful. He explained that pain often cracks the shell of forgetfulness, making space for the soul to remember its divine beginning. In this way, even sorrow could become sacred. Families who came to him broken often left with tears of relief, not because their problems vanished, but because they finally saw purpose in them. And that sense of purpose gave them the courage to keep walking their path. Cayce's emphasis on unity of creation turned personal tragedies into stepping stones, reminding people that no soul was ever alone, no matter how dark the road seemed. Another dimension of Cayce's teaching on the origin of souls is how it intersects with human responsibility in daily life. If all souls were created at the same time, then every choice we make today contributes not only to our growth, but to the evolution of the entire soul family. Cayce emphasized again and again that thoughts are things. He meant that our inner world shapes not just our own destiny, but the collective vibration of humanity. A thought of anger ripples outward, just as a thought of compassion heals beyond what we can see. When people asked him how to live with integrity, his answer was simple. Act as if every soul you meet has been with you since the beginning, because it has. That awareness, he said, transforms ordinary actions into sacred opportunities. The way you treat a stranger on the street echoes into eternity. Cayce also reminded seekers that remembering our shared origin does not erase individuality. Each soul, though created in the same instant, carries unique qualities, talents, and paths. He described the soul as a spark from the same flame, but each spark shining differently as it returns to its source. This means no one's journey can be compared or measured against another's. A life of hardship does not mean a soul is less evolved. It may mean that soul has chosen to face difficult lessons sooner. A life of comfort does not mean superiority. It may be a test of humility and service. By seeing life this way, envy loses its grip and gratitude takes its place. Cayce's teaching calls us to honor diversity, not as division, but as the unfolding of unity in countless forms. During the post-war years, as soldiers returned and society shifted, many sought Cayce's guidance about the meaning of progress. Was humanity doomed to repeat cycles of conflict? Cayce's response was rooted in the idea of simultaneous creation. He said that because all souls began together, the destiny of the world depended on collective remembrance. Civilization advances when more individuals awaken to their shared origin. He urged people not to wait for governments or leaders to enforce peace, but to begin with themselves. A single act of kindness, he insisted, could tip the balance because it aligned with the truth of unity. This was not naive optimism, it was a spiritual principle. Every soul carries responsibility for the whole, because the whole began together. And when enough souls live by this truth, the trajectory of humanity changes. One of Cayce's most repeated messages was that life is a school and Earth is the classroom. If all souls were created in one divine act, then every soul has enrolled in the same school, learning different subjects at different times. He told people not to despise the lessons they faced, no matter how hard. Each difficulty, he explained, was designed not by cruelty but by opportunity. Souls do not grow by avoiding challenges, but by facing them. Just as classmates in school may struggle in one subject and excel in another, souls progress unevenly, but always with the potential to master what is needed. And the final graduation is not escape from life, but the full remembrance of unity with God. This idea resonated deeply with those searching for meaning, giving them a framework where suffering became a path, not a prison. In the end, Edgar Cayce's teaching about the origin of souls was not just a mystical idea. It was a call to live differently. If all souls were created at once, then there is no stranger, no outsider, no soul more worthy of God's love than another. This means every act of service, every word of kindness, and every choice for compassion is not wasted. It is part of the great return to the source. Cayce urged people to see beyond the illusions of division and to remember the eternal truth. We began together, and we will return together. That vision gives meaning to our struggles, dignity to our journeys, and hope for our future. It transforms life from random chance into a sacred mission, and it reminds us that while we may forget our unity in the noise of the world, the soul never forgets. It carries the memory of its divine beginning, waiting for us to awaken to it. So now let me ask you, what do you believe about the origin of the soul? Do you feel that we were all created at once, or that souls emerge across time? Share your thoughts in the comments. I will heart every single one because your perspective matters, and together we build a circle of seekers searching for truth. And if this message touched you, like this video, share it with a friend who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next revelation. Each week, we dive deeper into Cayce's teachings, uncovering wisdom that still transforms lives today. Remember this, you are not alone, you have never been alone, because your soul was created in the same eternal moment as all others. And no matter how far you feel from God, you are still part of that original light, destined to return whole and radiant to the source from which you came. The devil is not who most people imagine, and that is exactly what makes this subject so disturbing and powerful. In one of his most impactful readings from 1932, Edgar Cayce shocked a group gathered in Virginia Beach by saying that evil is not an external figure waiting in the shadows with horns and fire, but a condition of the human soul when it is separated from its true source, God. He described the devil not as a monstrous creature, but as a state of consciousness. a distortion of divine energy that humans themselves empower through fear, selfishness, and ignorance. This revelation changed the way many saw good and evil. Instead of picturing a single enemy outside, Cayce pointed inward, to the forces we feed within our own lives. And here is where the truth gets uncomfortable. He warned that the devil can take shape through our thoughts, our choices, and our habits. But what he said next left everyone speechless. Cayce explained that even this force we call the devil is not eternal. It has no lasting power compared to the eternal light of God. Imagine hearing that during the Great Depression, when so many families felt surrounded by darkness. If you're finding this perspective shocking but liberating at the same time, take a second now to like this video, leave a comment telling us how you always imagined the devil before, and subscribe to this channel. I'll be marking every single comment with a little heart to show that I'm here with you on this journey. Cayce's words were not given in abstract theory. They came during real sessions, while he was in a deep trance, answering questions from desperate families. People came to him afraid of curses, demons, or a destiny ruled by evil. And Cayce, with his calm and steady voice, told them something that sounded almost impossible. There is no force in the universe greater than the soul aligned with its creator. This perspective shifted the battle against evil from a terrifying myth into a practical daily responsibility. The devil, in Cayce's understanding, was not a king ruling over hell, but the misdirection of human will. Think about that. Instead of fearing a monster, he asked people to take responsibility for how they use the creative power of their own minds. It was radical, even controversial, especially in America during the 1930s, when traditional images of hellfire and punishment dominated sermons. And yet, Cayce's readings opened a new door. What if humanity's greatest enemy is not an outside devil, but the neglect of our own divine nature? What if the devil, as we picture it, is simply a shadow we created by turning away from the light? During a session that changed the life of an entire family from Kentucky, a man asked Cayce directly, "How can we protect ourselves from the devil?" The answer was disarming in its simplicity. Keep your heart and mind on God, and the devil cannot touch you. No rituals, no magic, no complicated defenses, just the daily practice of aligning thoughts and emotions with the divine pattern. Cayce went further, saying that the devil gains strength only where there is emptiness of love, where fear has been allowed to grow unchecked. In that moment, the family broke into tears because they realized the battle was not outside their home, but inside their own hearts and choices. Think about the implications of this. If the devil is not an independent being but a state of consciousness, then every act of kindness, forgiveness, or compassion weakens its presence in the world. Every selfish act, every hateful word strengthens it. Cayce reframed spiritual warfare not as angels versus demons in the sky, but as humanity choosing every day whether to align with light or darkness. This teaching, however, was not meant to erase the seriousness of evil. On the contrary, Cayce emphasized how dangerous it is when humans forget their divine connection. He described entire nations falling under the weight of collective fear and hatred, especially during times of war. In one reading during the early 1940s, he pointed out that when societies feed on greed and violence, the devil manifests through systems of destruction, not just individual choices. It was a chilling perspective. Evil was not only personal, but collective. And he warned that humanity's future depended on how we deal with this reality. Will we continue to feed the devil by surrendering to division, or will we disarm it by remembering our unity with the Creator? These were not easy questions, and they are not easy today. But Cayce's point remains clear. The devil is not who you think, and it is not where you think. It is closer, more subtle, and more dependent on your daily actions than any terrifying myth could ever explain. When Cayce spoke about the devil as a condition of human consciousness, he did not do it to minimize the reality of suffering. Instead, he wanted people to realize the immense responsibility of their thoughts and emotions. In one of his readings, he explained that every negative thought is like planting a seed in the soil of the soul. Left unchecked, those seeds grow into patterns that can dominate an entire life. This, he said, is how the devil works. Not through possession by a horned figure, but through the slow corruption of inner habits that separate us from the divine. Imagine how unsettling this sounded to someone who grew up hearing sermons about eternal flames. Cayce redirected the battlefield to the mind and the heart, and yet this teaching was not despairing. He always stressed that love, prayer, and service are stronger than any shadow. He described the devil as a parasite that cannot survive where light is constantly invited in. That means the power is always with the individual. You decide if the devil finds a home in your life, or if it has no room to exist. What shocked many during these sessions was Cayce's insistence that the devil was not an eternal being but a temporary condition. Evil, he said, is always destined to be overcome by good, because darkness has no reality of its own. It only exists where light is absent. He compared it to a shadow, powerful in appearance but gone the instant light returns. During the years of World War II, when hopelessness was spreading across America and beyond, these words carried tremendous weight. People wanted to believe that evil had a permanent throne, but Cayce reminded them that every throne built on fear crumbles when confronted by love. In a trance reading, he once said that the only hell is distance from God, and the only devil is what feeds that distance. Think about that. He was telling people that the flames of hell were not waiting after death, but burning already in the choices we make that deny compassion and truth. And yet, with the same breath, he offered hope. If you turn even one thought back toward love, the shadow begins to dissolve. Another powerful moment came when Cayce was asked about temptation. A woman from Ohio, worried that her son was falling into destructive habits, pleaded for guidance. Cayce, in trance, told her that the devil often appears disguised as desire for comfort, shortcuts, or the illusion of control. It was not always a dramatic confrontation, but often a whisper in daily life. He warned that the devil gains ground when we believe we can live without accountability to the Creator. But he also told her something that changed her perspective. The stronger the temptation, the greater the opportunity to prove the light. To him, temptation was not proof of the devil's power, but proof of the soul's potential to rise above it. This teaching reframed the way many began to see their struggles. Instead of feeling cursed, they began to see every challenge as an invitation to grow closer to God. It is important to notice how Cayce's view created tension with traditional Christian imagery of his time. While preachers often emphasized eternal punishment and a literal devil waiting to claim souls, Cayce's readings offered a picture of responsibility and redemption. He was not denying Scripture, but interpreting it in a deeper, symbolic way. When asked about Satan as described in the Bible, Cayce said that the Scriptures point to the same truth. The devil is the force of separation, the adversary that exists only when man turns away from God. In other words, the Bible's imagery was not meant to make us fear a creature, but to warn us about the condition of our own hearts. For audiences in Virginia Beach and elsewhere, this was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because it removed the comfort of blaming an external monster. Liberating, because it placed the power of victory directly in the hands of each soul. And that is why this message, though controversial, still resonates with so many today. As the years went on, Cayce deepened this teaching by connecting it to humanity's collective journey. He explained that what we call the devil can appear not just in personal struggles, but in entire systems and institutions. When greed, corruption, or hatred dominate governments and economies, those structures become channels through which the devil operates. This was a startling claim during the Great Depression, when many Americans had lost faith in banks, leaders, and even the fairness of society itself. Cayce's words offered both a diagnosis and a solution. If evil can take shape in collective thought and action, then good can also manifest in the same way. Communities built on cooperation, compassion, and fairness can dissolve the devil's influence just as individuals can by choosing love over fear. This was a radical but deeply practical message. Instead of waiting for an external savior to slay a monster, Cayce reminded people that they were collectively responsible for creating either a world of hell or a world of heaven. He often referred to the idea of the adversary, a term that resonates with the Hebrew root of the word Satan. For Cayce, this adversary was real, but not in the way most people imagined. It was the resistance within the human condition, the constant pull away from spiritual truth. In one session in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, he explained that every soul carries both the seed of light and the temptation of darkness, and the devil's so-called power is nothing more than the misuse of creative energy. This aligned with his larger teaching about the laws of the mind. Thoughts are creative, emotions are magnetic, and what we dwell on becomes real in our lives. If we feed fear, anger, or selfishness, we energize the adversary. If we cultivate forgiveness, kindness, and faith, we empower the divine. This meant that every person was not just fighting a battle for their own soul, but influencing the spiritual climate of the entire planet. During wartime, his warnings became even sharper. Families would ask him whether the devil was behind the rise of dictators and mass violence. Cayce, in his calm yet urgent tone, would respond that yes, this was the devil manifesting. Not as a single demon, but as millions of choices driven by fear and hatred. He explained that the devil thrives when humanity forgets its oneness, when neighbor turns against neighbor, and when entire nations lose sight of the sacred value of life. But he also reminded them that the same collective power that gave rise to war could be turned toward peace. Prayer, he said, was not just personal but a force that could heal nations. He urged people to pray not for victory in battle, but for the awakening of compassion in all hearts. This was a controversial statement in the middle of global conflict, but it carried a truth that still pierces through time. The devil's greatest weakness is the awakening of human consciousness to its divine origin. One of his most striking statements came when someone asked if the devil would always exist. His answer was firm, only as long as humanity allows it. He compared it to disease. Just as sickness can spread when the body is neglected, evil spreads when the soul is left untended. But just as the body has the power to heal, the soul and the collective spirit of humanity also have the power to restore harmony. This vision stripped away the terror of an eternal devil and replaced it with the challenge of responsibility. It asked every person to take ownership of their inner life and every community to reflect on what they were creating together. Cayce's words were both sobering and empowering. They reminded people that hell was not only a place beyond death, but a reality they could create or dismantle right now. And that realization gave countless listeners a sense of hope, even in the darkest chapters of history. Cayce's view of the devil also connected to his broader teachings about the soul's eternal journey. He explained that the adversary, as frightening as it seems, has no lasting dominion because every soul is destined to return to God. In one powerful trance reading, he said that the devil is like a storm at sea. It may cause terror, confusion, and even destruction, but it cannot erase the ocean itself. The ocean, he said, is the divine presence, endless and unchanging. The storm eventually passes, but the ocean remains. This image comforted people who felt overwhelmed by the apparent strength of evil in their lives. It was a reminder that no matter how dark things appear, the foundation of reality is not evil, but God's love. And when someone asked him whether hell was eternal, Cayce clarified, hell is real, but it is a condition, not a destination. The soul can free itself from it by turning back toward the light. The devil, therefore, is not a ruler of souls but a temporary jailer, whose chains dissolve the moment we awaken to our divine nature. This perspective transformed the way many approached their struggles. A man once came to Cayce desperate, believing he was cursed and possessed. During the session, Cayce reassured him, no soul is ever lost. No power of darkness can destroy what God has created. Instead of focusing on banishing an external devil, he guided the man to reframe his life with prayer, service, and forgiveness. Over time, this man reported feeling lighter, freer, as if the weight of despair had finally lifted. Stories like this spread across Virginia Beach, making people realize that the devil's grip was not invincible. It was fragile, broken the instant someone remembered their oneness with God. This is why Cayce insisted that love is the most powerful force in the universe. It is not just an emotion, but the very vibration of creation itself. Wherever love is present, the devil cannot remain. Wherever fear reigns, the devil thrives. It is that simple and that profound. Cayce also drew connections between this concept and the ancient idea of the records of the soul. He said that the devil feeds on forgetfulness. When souls forget who they are and where they come from, they become vulnerable to deception. But when people awaken to their eternal nature, the adversary loses ground. This is why he often urged individuals to meditate, pray, and study scripture, not as empty rituals, but as ways to realign their memory with the truth. Evil could manipulate the surface mind, but it could never erase the deeper memory written in the soul. The devil in this sense is nothing more than humanity's amnesia of its divine identity. Imagine the shift this creates. Instead of fighting an external monster, your task is to remember who you really are. That memory is your greatest weapon. That memory dissolves fear. And that memory, Cayce believed, is what will ultimately transform the world. It is worth noting that this teaching continues to divide opinion. Some critics argued that Cayce's view diminished the seriousness of evil. Others said it made people too responsible, removing the comfort of blaming an outside enemy. But those who experienced his guidance firsthand often described it as life-changing. Families that once lived in fear of curses began to live with confidence in prayer. Individuals who believed they were doomed to hell began to find peace in the idea that God's mercy was stronger than any shadow. Cayce's honesty about the devil was not meant to scare, but to empower. He showed that the greatest battle of good and evil is not fought in distant realms, but within the choices of everyday life. And his message was clear. You have more power than you realize, and the devil is not who you think. The adversary is real, but it is not permanent, and it cannot survive where light is welcomed. One of the most striking aspects of Cayce's message was how he tied the devil to everyday actions, not just dramatic moments of temptation. He explained that the adversary shows itself in subtle ways: resentment held against a neighbor, dishonesty in business, the quiet neglect of prayer. These small choices, he said, are what open the door to greater shadows. Evil rarely appears in grand form. It begins as compromise, as justification, as looking away from the truth. In one of his sessions during the post-war years, Cayce told a group that the devil is strengthened by the little things you think do not matter. That was a sobering thought for his audience. Instead of waiting for an apocalyptic battle, they began to realize that the true confrontation was happening every day in their own habits. But Cayce also emphasized the power of small acts of good. A simple prayer, a kind word, or an honest deed could close the door as quickly as it had been opened. To him, the devil was not inevitable but conditional, dependent on human participation. He also warned against fear itself, saying that fear is the devil's favorite weapon. Fear magnifies the shadow, making it appear larger than it is. During the 1930s, when economic collapse caused widespread despair, people often came to Cayce afraid of unseen forces. He would remind them that fear weakens the soul's connection to God. Fear invites the adversary, while faith repels it. He once told a woman who feared curses on her family, "No curse can touch you unless you accept it in fear. Stand in the light, and nothing can overcome you." This teaching turned spiritual warfare into a matter of inner alignment. The devil, in this sense, was more psychological than physical, feeding on the mind's willingness to believe in separation from God. For many who heard these words, it was like a key turning in a locked door. They finally understood that their fear had been empowering the very darkness they dreaded. Cayce's approach also revealed his deep respect for Scripture. When asked how his teachings aligned with the Bible's image of Satan, he pointed to passages that describe the devil as the accuser, or the adversary. These, he explained, are symbolic descriptions of the same condition of separation he spoke about. He was careful not to dismiss the Bible, but to interpret its language in a way that revealed a more profound truth. In his view, Scripture was never meant to scare people into submission, but to awaken them to responsibility. The devil was not a rival God or eternal being, but the echo of humanity's own misuse of free will. This interpretation shocked traditional audiences, but also inspired countless people to see their faith with new eyes. It turned fear into responsibility, despair into hope. The devil was not a monster waiting in the shadows. It was a mirror reflecting back the distance we create when we choose against love. This teaching has implications that reach far beyond Cayce's time. If the devil is not an external monster, but a condition of consciousness, then every generation must decide what form it takes. In our modern age, that may mean the adversary manifests through addiction, division, exploitation, or indifference to suffering. Cayce's words remind us that evil has no power of its own. It only borrows strength from human choices. And just as importantly, they remind us that every individual has the ability to starve the adversary by refusing to feed it. Through love, through prayer, through service, we participate in disarming the devil, not just in our own lives, but in the life of the world. That is why his message remains as urgent today as it was in Virginia Beach, almost a century ago. And if these insights are opening your mind, take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and leave a comment telling us what part of Cayce's view of the devil surprised you most. I'll be marking every comment with a heart as a sign of gratitude and connection with this community. Another key layer of Cayce's message was his teaching on personal responsibility. He repeatedly stressed that blaming the devil was often a way for people to avoid facing their own choices. In one of his trance sessions during the 1940s, someone asked why misfortune kept following them. Cayce answered, "You have created habits that separate you from God, and you call that the devil. But what you create, you can also uncreate." This was a radical idea for the time, when most sermons emphasized external punishment. Cayce was saying that each soul has the creative power to shape its own path. Evil was not something imposed from outside. It was something cultivated or starved by daily living. For some, this message was uncomfortable. It stripped away excuses. But for many others, it was liberating, because it meant they were not helpless against an eternal enemy. They had the power to choose, and with each choice they were either feeding the adversary or disarming it. Cayce also pointed out how the devil thrives in environments of ignorance. He said that when people are not taught about their spiritual nature, they become easy prey for fear and manipulation. This is why he emphasized education, prayer, and meditation as tools of protection. Knowledge, he explained, brings light, and light always diminishes darkness. In one reading that touched an entire audience, he said, "The devil is most dangerous where truth is absent. Bring truth, and the devil fades." This inspired many to see their own study of Scripture, not as a dry duty, but as a shield. Understanding the deeper meaning of life was itself a form of defense. Evil could not dominate an awakened mind. It is striking to consider how practical this teaching was. While others described demons as forces to be cast out, Cayce described them as illusions to be outgrown. During a consultation with a family in Virginia, a mother worried that her children would be attacked by the devil because of their youthful mistakes. Cayce, in his calm manner, reassured her that no soul is ever beyond redemption. He explained that the devil's influence is strongest when people believe they are unworthy of God's love. That belief itself creates distance from the divine. He urged her to teach her children not to fear the devil, but to practice love in small daily ways. "Teach them kindness," he said, "and you will have shut the door before the devil can even knock." This mother left the session with a sense of hope, realizing that she did not need rituals of protection, but simply a home filled with love, forgiveness, and truth. These teachings spread through word of mouth, reinforcing the idea that the devil's so-called power was fragile, dependent entirely on the choices and beliefs of people themselves. In historical context, Cayce's view came at a time when America was searching for answers. The trauma of the Great Depression, followed by the horrors of World War II, made people desperate to understand why evil seemed so overwhelming. Traditional religious images of a fiery hell and horned devil offered fear, but little hope. Cayce's voice entered with a different tone, one of empowerment, reminding people that even in the darkest times, they held the key to transformation. He acknowledged the reality of suffering, but refused to give evil more power than it deserved. He told people that the devil is not who you think, and this truth is why his readings remain relevant today. Evil is not a ruler of the world, but a shadow that fades when humanity chooses love. And that choice is available in every moment, for every soul, regardless of how lost they may feel. Cayce also connected the concept of the devil with humanity's misuse of spiritual law. He taught that every soul has access to divine creative energy, and this energy is neutral. It can be directed toward building life or toward destroying it. When misused, that energy becomes what we label as evil. In one of his trance readings, he said, "The devil is not a being, but the misuse of what is given by God for creation." This perspective reframed sin and temptation not as eternal damnation, but as lessons in responsibility. Each time a person chooses selfishness over service, fear over faith, or hatred over love, they are misdirecting divine energy. The result feels like bondage, confusion, or despair, which people have historically named as the devil's work. But Cayce explained that those conditions can always be reversed by redirecting the same creative force back toward God. This gave people hope, because it meant no mistake was final. Every wrong turn could be realigned. He was especially insistent that the devil has no independent existence apart from humanity's choices. When asked if demons were real, Cayce responded that they are thought forms, created and sustained by human minds. If enough people feed an idea of fear, resentment, or violence, that energy can take on a powerful presence influencing others like a shadow cast across society. This was his way of explaining not only personal struggles, but also collective evils, such as war and oppression. They were not orchestrated by a single monster, but by humanity's shared misuse of thought and will. Yet he insisted that just as collective thought can create destruction, it can also create healing. Communities united in prayer, compassion, and forgiveness can dissolve even the strongest appearance of evil. This is why he urged people to pray not only for themselves, but for nations, leaders, and even their enemies. Cayce's emphasis on forgiveness was central to his understanding of disarming the devil. He explained that resentment is one of the adversary's most effective tools. Holding on to bitterness, he said, chains the soul to the very darkness it wants to escape. In one session, when asked how to defeat the devil, Cayce replied simply, "Forgive." He explained that forgiveness restores the soul's connection to God, and where that connection is restored, the devil has no hold. This teaching was not easy. Many found it almost impossible to forgive deep wounds. But Cayce reminded them that forgiveness does not mean excusing evil. It means refusing to let evil control your inner life. To forgive is to remove the devil's fuel. Without resentment to feed on, the adversary withers away. This principle transformed lives, helping people heal from betrayal, loss, and anger, not through fear of punishment, but through the liberating power of compassion. His perspective also resonated with America's cultural search for meaning in the mid-20th century. During times of rapid change, people feared that evil forces were overtaking society. Cayce's voice reminded them that the devil cannot dominate where truth and love are practiced. He acknowledged that darkness exists, but he stripped away its illusion of permanence. Evil, he said, is always temporary because God alone is eternal. For many who heard him, this was not just theory but a lifeline, a way to navigate the turbulence of history without surrendering to despair. His honesty about the devil gave people courage. Instead of being terrified of an external monster, they began to recognize their own role in overcoming evil by living with integrity, compassion, and faith. This shift in understanding empowered countless souls to stand in the light with confidence, knowing that the devil was never stronger than the smallest act of genuine love. As Cayce's work reached its conclusion on this subject, his words carried the weight of both warning and promise. He wanted people to understand that the devil, as terrifying as tradition painted it, is nothing compared to the power of God within the soul. In his final reflections, he explained that evil is like a shadow that cannot survive when light is chosen, and that every soul, no matter how lost, retains the ability to turn back toward the Creator. He insisted that no force outside you is greater than the divine spark inside you. And this is why he said the devil is not who you think. It is not an eternal ruler or an external enemy, but the misuse of your own God-given power. That message is sobering because it removes excuses. But it is also liberating because it places the victory in your hands right now in this very moment. Each thought, each choice, each act of kindness tips the balance toward light. Cayce's honesty shocked audiences during the Great Depression and the years of war, but it also gave them courage to keep going. He offered a vision of evil that did not trap people in fear, but challenged them to rise. And perhaps this is the greatest legacy of his teachings. He reframed the cosmic battle of good and evil as something happening not far away, but inside every soul, every family, every nation. That means the devil is not waiting for you in the afterlife. It is waiting in the moments you choose selfishness over service, fear over faith, or resentment over forgiveness. But here is the hope. Every time you choose love, you disarm it. Every time you turn toward God, you break its illusion. This is the path Cayce revealed, one that is as urgent today as it was in Virginia Beach nearly a century ago. If these words have opened something in you, if you feel the weight of truth in them, then act. Choose light now, in your thoughts and in your life. And if this message spoke to you, I invite you to help keep it alive. Like this video to show the algorithm that voices like Cayce's still matter today. Share it with someone who may be struggling with fear, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next revelation that could change your perspective forever. Most importantly, leave a comment below sharing what part of Cayce's view on the devil touched you the most. I'll be reading them and marking every single one with a heart, because together we are not just talking about these truths. We are building a community of souls committed to remembering who we really are. The devil is not who you think, and you are far more powerful than you realize. Let this be the moment you turn the light back on